Hello YouTube. Who has not heard of mermaids and nymphs, half women, half fish, living most often in the depths of the sea or oceans? It would not be an exaggeration to say that their images permeate the entire world folklore and a number of my videos. There are legends and stories about mermaids among peoples whose history is not connected with the sea at all. In this case, the habitats of strange creatures are called rivers and lakes, and in all ages and periods, naturalists and historians have wondered whether mermaids are purely mythical creatures or whether in the very distant past there really existed on our planet, albeit a few, but a reasonable kind of amphibian people. In my research of underwater humanoids, I came across a number of similar stories. The earliest amphibious creatures appear to have been Babylonian fish people. They were known to the Babylonians as anedoti, which translates as repulsive, but despite their unattractive appearance, they were influential enough that the Babylonians accepted their teachings and learned from them the fundamental principles of civilization. The most majestic representative of anedoti or anedotai was Oannes, depicted in ancient Babylonian images as a curious, complex hybrid of a man and a fish, with a bearded male head under the head of a fish and the body of a fish carried on the back of a human body. The origins of the first legends about these fascinating inhabitants of the underworld kingdom go back to ancient Babylon. The most interesting thing about them is that along with female fish, male amphibians very often appeared there. We must not forget that the powerful Babylonian deities worshipped by the ancients are also outwardly half fish, including the before-mentioned sun god Oannes. He was also known as Adapa and Wana, and he was a Babylonian god of approximately 4th century BC, but I think much earlier than that. But let us look at Africa. There is a reclusive tribe of farmers living in caves and on hillsides, inhabiting a rare rocky plateau in southeastern Mali, West Africa. They live in the Homburi Mountains near Timbuktu, isolated topographically and culturally from the outside world for countless centuries. They may well seem at first glance extremely unlikely receptacles of a highly developed astronomical knowledge. In the 1930s, French scientists in Africa discovered one of the oldest tribes of the earth, called the Dogons, who managed to exist in complete isolation from the civilized world for several thousand years. It is believed that they are of Egyptian origin. After living in Libya for some time, they settled in Mali, West Africa, bringing with them legends about astronomy dating back to 3200 BC. The first Western scientists to visit and study the Dogon people were French anthropologists Dr. Marcel Griot and Germain Dithioren, who first came into contact with them in 1931 and continued to study the Dogon people for the next 3 decades, culminating in a detailed study conducted in 1946-1950. During their work, these anthropologists documented traditional mythology and sacred beliefs of the Dogon, which included an extraordinary amount of ancient knowledge about Sirius, a sparkling distant dog star. At the same time, the Dogons shocked researchers with their fantastically accurate astronomical knowledge, which was ahead of modern science. The priest of the tribe explained that the knowledge was given to their ancestors by space aliens who came from the star Sirius and looked like amphibians. The Dogons tell the legend of the Nomo, terrible-looking creatures who arrived on a ship with fire and thunder. After landing, something with 4 legs appeared in the spaceships and dragged the ship to the depression which filled the water until the ship floated in it. The Dogons called this spacecraft Pelu Tolo, or the star of the 10th moon. These aliens, like I said, supposedly came from the Sirius star system. Their spaceship spiraled down from the sky and landed somewhere to the northeast of the current homeland of the Dogon. There was a lot of noise and wind. The ship landed on 3 pillars, braked and stopped hitting the ground. 4 legs appeared and again dragged the vessel to the recess, which was filled with water until the vessel floated. At the same time, a new star was spotted in the sky, which may have been a large spaceship. The Dogon described the star as having a circle of reddish rays around it. The circle of rays looked like a spreading spot, but it remained the same size. While the Dogon drawings show a spaceship hovering in the sky waiting for the Nomo who landed on Earth, it represents the 3 stages of Pelu Tolo, when different amounts of blood or flame are ejected from it. Perhaps like it was making an emergency landing. So the Nomo, masters of water, observers, teachers or instructors, saviors and spiritual guardians. That's how they were described. So according to the Dogon mythology, Nomo was the first living being created by Amma, the god of heaven and creator of the universe. Yes, in oral traditions, drawings and cuneiform tablets of the Dogon, there are mentions of creatures similar to humans who have legs, but who are depicted as having a large fish skin flowing down the body. So the Nomos were more like fish than people and had to live in water. They were saviors and spiritual guardians who looked like merfolk, mermaids, the equivalent of ONS in the Philistine religion in Philistia, in what is today Israel, was a deity with a human body and a fish tail called Dagon. How interesting. But back to the earth mermaids. Decidedly, in all sea parables and legends, mermaids and sirens are not only seductive but also insidious creatures, luring sailors into their nets with singing and wonderful music, fascinating, lulling them to sleep with the sole purpose of destroying them. Even a fleeting meeting or encounter with a mermaid, just glimpse on the horizon, sailors consider to be a very bad omen. Whoever sees this sea seductress will certainly drown very soon. But not only sailors are witnesses to and participants of encounters with mysterious inhabitants of the depths. The rumor about mermaids in all ages has been so stable and widespread, of course, that it has not passed Russia. And I already told you about some of the indigenous mermaids, the so-called pearl hunters, and more. Well, Emperor Peter the Great was also interested in the mermaids, so much that he had turned to a man who wrote a lot about them, the Danish colonial priest Francois Valentin. Here's what he replied to the Russian emperor after a long list of the testimonies received in the process of careful research by those who had encountered unusual creatures. If there are any stories in the world at all that are trustworthy, then in particular are these. The fact that some people don't believe in them doesn't mean anything. There will always be people who deny the existence of Constantinople, Rome, Cairo, just because they did not have to see them. As for modern times, the evidence of collisions or encounters with mermaids, of course, has become much less. The reason for this, if mermaids really exist, there may be environmental pollution of rivers and seas, contributing to the extinction of amazing creatures of nature, and the significantly increasing speed or velocity of water vehicles. In the era of sailboats, sailors had much more time to look at the sea, which meant more opportunities to consider its inhabitants. And also the sea and the ocean was not polluted with plastic like it is today on a daily basis, when plastic, as we know, kills sea inhabitants. I have presented Central Asian, Caucasus, Russian, and Ukrainian encounters. Here's another one. The existence of mermaids is absolutely not doubted by the majority of quite modern residents of the coast of large rivers, including Russian ones. In the late 1960s, Karina Kareva, a Soviet scientist, had a chance to participate in a folklore expedition, the route of which included Transnistria and part of the coast of the wild Carpathian river Prut, which, despite the external shallow water, is famous for unexpected pools. Fishermen, not only professional but also amateurs, are reluctant to talk about mermaids. After all, encountering them is considered to be a very bad omen. Still, Kareva and her crew managed to talk to some fishermen in sufficient detail. The most amazing story was told to them by a certain Mykola, a gloomy old man who lived alone in a half-collapsed mud hut, clinging to the mountain at the whimsical bend of the Prut river. They came to Mykola not by chance. In the nearest village, they were told of a strange and unlikely story of his loneliness. Excuse me. Many years ago, he was already a fisherman. He had just buried his mother, but he was not yet distinguished by a gloomy disposition and unsociability. Well, one day in the summer at dawn, Mykola went fishing in a secret, remote place that few people knew about. Wandering along the shallows to the boulder chosen in advance from which he was going to fish, Mykola was first to stop suddenly. To his amazement, he saw that someone was lying on the sand between him and the rock. Coming closer, the fisherman froze. It was a mermaid. That's how he described it to the scientists later. She was not tall, maybe 1.5 meters, fragile, the upper half of the body with very white skin, hair almost to the waist, greenish gray, like thin algae, an elegant, regular face with excessively large, dark, pupilless eyes. In those eyes, Mykola saw something resembling, from his point of view, a plea for help. She kind of fell asleep, he explained. The scientist who wrote his story down understood this to mean that the mermaid fainted. Without hesitation, Mykola decided to give the mermaid first aid. Overcoming fear, he threw off his robe, shifted the clothing onto her, trying not to inhale the strong and strange aroma coming from her body and causing nausea. And then he carried the river guest to his mud hut. He had only one bed, and he laid the fantastic find on it. The mermaid did not resist. Apparently, she just couldn't. Apparently, she was already dying, Mykola explained seriously. According to him, he sat next to her for almost 2 days, but he did not see how she died, because the mermaid did not give any signs of life after being placed on a human bed. But at some point, Mykola noticed that her huge eyes were covered with a dull film and realized that it was over. The fragrance emanating from the mermaid began to disappear, and with its strange state into which Mykola fell, having lost track of time, he could not or did not want to tell exactly what kind of condition it was, just muttering briefly, "Yes, I saw different things." The old man did not look like a visionary. In addition, there were people in the village who claimed that they themselves had seen from afar the amazing finding of Mikola. Many people looked into his hut during those 2 days, but no one dared to enter. He himself was kind of gloomy, and after that he remained so, a non-human. Obviously, old fisherman noticed the distrust of the scientists to his story, because after hesitating, he took them to the mountains behind his mud hut. A beech forest was already beginning there, and having gone 50 meters deep into it, they saw a small, well-groomed grave mound under one of the trees. On it, instead of an Eastern Christian Orthodox cross, there was a small, roughly carved wooden figure of a mermaid. This figure and the mound were forever imprinted in the memory of Karina Kareva, along with the mysterious and gloomy history of Mikola. Interestingly, all mermaid legends, regardless of the place and time of their origin, the inhabitants of the underwater world are attributed the same qualities. Apart from the aforementioned treachery and unfriendly attitude towards people, what are those qualities? First of all, these are the properties of that today we call extrasensory, starting with the obviously hypnotic singing of the Indian river nymphs Apsaras, and the abilities to use telepathy and magic of the ancient Babylonian amphibian gods, and ending with the beliefs of sailors and fishermen that a mermaid is able to fascinate and completely subdue a person with a glance. The magic of mermaids cannot be called benign. It testifies with rare exceptions to their unfriendly attitude towards people. If we take into the account that the native world of amphibians is underwater, and remember what environmental damage mankind has caused and is causing to this world at all, at least in the last 2 centuries, there is nothing to be surprised at. It is not known what mermaids eat, but according to several records dating back to the 17th and 19th centuries, and supported by the testimony of quite serious people, they do not eat only fish, but also smaller marine life. It means that they are not carnivorous and do not destroy their fellow habitat. Another good reason not to feel sympathy for human beings, knowing our habits. In the documents of the mentioned centuries, there are several cases when people managed to either catch or find a mermaid on the shore. They did not have time to disappear with the tide. In particular, one of them placed in a barrel with seawater, tried to feed something down. They tried to feed something to her, down to the smallest shrimp, but to no avail. After living in captivity for about 3 days, the mermaid, she was blonde. That's how she was described, and there's not much more description. Anyway, the mermaid died. Judging by the descriptions, the inhabitants of the underwater world can stay on the surface for quite a long time, but their stay in the air is strictly limited. According to the available records in the ship's logs of past centuries, all captives invariably died, much faster than amphibians available for scientists' research. Finally, the resemblance to humans is not limited to the appearance of the upper half of the body. These creatures are undoubtedly intelligent because the insidiousness of which they have been accused for centuries is there must be a reason, at least to some people. And if these creatures are really not the product of the rich folk popular fantasy, but representatives of the neighboring civilization that really existed once and is disappearing today, it's a bit insulting that they categorically do not want to be friends with us. After all, mankind has always dreamed of finding fellow human beings or humanoid creatures. However, at the same time, we're much more often trying to look into the stellar depths of outer space than into the mysterious underwater world of our planet, forgetting that we live, in fact, on a little explored planet. That's what I keep telling you in my books and lectures, trying to draw attention to what's going on at the bottom of the oceans and also in the boreal forest of Siberia or the impenetrable deserts of Asia. So there are grounds for resentment not only for us but also for possible representatives of the Homo amphibious, the inhabitants of the fascinating underwater kingdom. Or maybe they don't want too much of our attention. This is what I wanted to let you know today, and I'll bring you more information about my research into the underwater humanoids and underwater mysteries. Of course, coming mainly from the old Soviet and Russian sources, but also from Eurasia and places like China and India. And if you like my research, I please ask that you support me. You'll find the links in the description to this video, and I'll share stories of my experiences in places like Yucatan, Mexico, in Southern Africa, of course in the old USSR, and so forth. And I thank you for your attention. Please subscribe to my channel and please tell others.